Warning: this story will leave you deep in thought for a long time. If you love machinery, history, and examples of how people displayed incredible inventiveness under unbearable conditions, you've come to the right place. I promise it's going to get hot. Be sure to read all the way to the end, because that's where I'll be waiting for your comments and opinions. And yes, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these in-depth analyses. There will be many more like this. The year of desperation and scarcity. Why do they have to MacGyver captured equipment? Picture autumn of the year 42. The Stalingrad meat grinder. The entire nation is straining every muscle. Equipment losses are colossal. Dozens, if not hundreds, of tanks and guns burn on the front lines every single day. Industry, only just evacuated to the Urals and Siberia, is running itself ragged, but it simply can't keep up with the gaps. Here, we need a brief but crucial economic and industrial overview. To grasp the scale of the catastrophe, let's really absorb the numbers. By the end of 42, the USSR had produced approximately 25,000 tanks. That number sounds huge, right? But let's look at losses. In 42 alone, irrecoverable losses amounted to roughly 15,000 armored vehicles. Can you imagine? Industry is working like a machine, yet the net gain is just a drop in the ocean. Moreover, most of this production consisted of light tanks, the T-60 and T-70, which were significantly inferior to German Panzer tanks and StuGs in armor and firepower. And what about the Germans? In 42, German industry was only just hitting its stride. The very StuG III we'll discuss was their true workhorse. Over the entire war, the Germans produced more than 10,000 of them. It was a reliable, well-established machine in production, and it flooded the Eastern Front in massive numbers. And right in this hell, our troops desperately lacked one thing: mobile, well-protected artillery that could keep pace with advancing infantry and tanks and smoke out the enemy from fortified bunkers and buildings. Hauling howitzers by horse was slow and dangerous. What they needed was a self-propelled gun, and such a self-propelled gun was already being designed. The legendary SG-122, based on the T-34 tank. But here's the harsh truth, friends. Between a blueprint on a drafting table and the first serial production vehicle on the front lines lies an abyss. The Uralmash factory needed time to set up machines, refine the technology, and train workers. But in 42, time was a luxury they didn't have. And that's when a brilliantly simple idea emerged. What if they used what the Germans had so kindly gifted them? After every major battle, the fields were littered with knocked out and abandoned German tanks and self-propelled guns. Among them were quite a few StuG IIIs. This machine was exceptionally well designed. Low silhouette, excellent frontal armor, a full 80 millimeters, and a reliable suspension system. But it mounted a 75 millimeter gun, which was already too weak for Soviet needs. And then, the epiphany. What if, instead of repairing these StuGs as is, they took their chassis as a base and mounted our own native 122mm M30 howitzer on top? That very gun, affectionately nicknamed Pukovic, down jacket, in infantry units for its powerful high-explosive shell. The combination seemed perfect: German reliability and protection plus Soviet firepower and simplicity. Thus was born the project known as the SG-122. The acronym is simple and brilliant: Samochnia Gehitsa, self-propelled howitzer. Caliber, 122 millimeters. No extra words. The essence is in the name. The Mittelschee MacGyver. How Russian ingenuity was forged from German steel. And now we reach the most fascinating part of our story. Where is this ambitious project sent? To some giant tank manufacturing complex? Not at all. Production was entrusted to Mittelschee Machine Building Plant Number 40. Honestly, when I first learned this fact, my brain nearly exploded. Mittelschee? A machine building plant? That's no Uralmash or Chelyabinsk tractor plant. What do they even know about tanks? But as it turned out, that was precisely the key. Plant number 40 wasn't constrained by standard tank building technologies. Before the war, it manufactured railway cars and textile industry equipment. After the war began, it switched to producing artillery shell casings and other military gear. These weren't academic tank builders. They were true handymen in the best possible sense. Engineers and workers accustomed to solving problems not from textbooks, but through trial and error, ingenuity, and brute force. Picture this scene: a workshop freezing cold. Several battered, hole-riddled StuG III hulls stand around. Next to them, brand new, paint and metal smelling 122mm M30 howitzers. The task: join the two. No blueprints, no instructions. Just an order. It must be done. Work erupted in a frantic rush. The German fighting compartment was cut away. In its place, they welded a new, roomier, but open-topped superstructure. Why open-topped? So the howitzer would fit, and so the crew would have at least some space to operate. This was a conscious compromise. Protection was sacrificed for the ability to handle the massive gun in tight quarters. The crew consisted of 5 men: commander, gunner, loader, driver mechanic, and radio operator. Space inside was catastrophically tight. The loader needed near acrobatic skills just to ram the 25-kilogram shell into the breech. But it was possible, and that was already a victory. By late June of '42, just weeks after work began, the prototype was ready. By October of that same year, the factory had produced a full 9 serial SG-122s. Can you imagine that pace? Amid total shortages of everything from metal to machine tools, people achieved the nearly impossible. But fate is a vengeful mistress. While Medici was MacGyvering its self-propelled gun, the larger Soviet machine made a different decision. State Defense Committee Order Number 2661, dated December 27, '42, instructed Plant Number 40 to master production of a light T-80 tank. Seems logical, right? The plant had gotten into armored vehicles, so let's give them a proper Soviet serial production machine. But here's where wartime surrealism shows itself. Despite this order, the plant was still ordered to complete 10 more SG-122s. How do we make sense of this? Total chaos? Or such desperate need for these hybrids that production was deemed essential, even under threat of sanctions? I leaned toward the latter. The front was screaming, "Give us self-propelled guns." And there were still catastrophically few of our own, native SU-122s. So they had to patch the gaps with whatever they had. The outcome is sad but deeply respectful. According to military acceptance records, from October '42 to January '43, a total of 21 machines were delivered. 21. An entire story in just 21 examples. Serial numbers ran consecutively, from 1001 to 1021. Each machine was worth its weight in gold. Each was the result of titanic labor by engineers and workers who, deep in the rear and at the limits of their strength, accomplished what seemed impossible to expect of them. The heart and soul of the SG-122. What kind of machine was this? Now, let's mentally picture this combat vehicle. Not on paper, but in metal. A low, squat, angular hull of the German StuG. Recognizable anti-ricochet armor plates. And on top, a bulky, awkward, yet deeply familiar superstructure with a long, powerful barrel of our M30 protruding from it. A technical analysis that'll make you whistle. Armament: 122mm M30 howitzer. Its high explosive shell weighed approximately 25 kilograms. To grasp its power, imagine this. The explosion of such a shell created a crater 1 meter deep and 3 meters wide. The guaranteed lethal radius against personnel from shrapnel, up to 30 meters. For infantry in a trench or wooden earth firing position, this was pure hell. It wouldn't penetrate a tank with a direct hit, but for the SG-122's intended role, destroying fortifications and infantry, it was the perfect weapon. Armor: hull front, the same 80 millimeters of German steel. This offered excellent protection against most Wehrmacht anti-tank guns at medium and long ranges. But the superstructure was the opposite. Sides thin, top completely open. The crew was protected from bullets and shrapnel, but any mortar barrage or airburst shell overhead could be fatal. This was the main design flaw, conscious and accepted. Engine and suspension. The heart remained the German Maybach HL-120 TRM, rated at 300 horsepower. The engine was temperamental, demanding in fuel and maintenance, but powerful and reliable. It propelled the 30-ton behemoth, even heavier now with a new superstructure and gun, to 40 kilometers per hour on roads. The torsion bar suspension with individual springs handled the load, though it operated at its limits. What was the bottom line? It was essentially a sniper rifle for engaging point fortifications. Thanks to its good armor and low profile, it could approach close enough to flatten an enemy bunker with 1 or 2 shots. But it was vulnerable in close combat and utterly defenseless against aircraft and indirect artillery fire. The fiery path of 21 soldiers. Combat déploiement. And so, 21 self-propelled guns left the workshops and headed for the front. But don't imagine them all charging into battle together. Reality was far more prosaic and tragic. 6 of the first 9 machines produced in October were sent to training institutions. 2 went to the 15th Reserve Training Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment, 2 each to the 2nd Kiev and 2nd Rostov artillery schools, and 1 to a testing ground. Why? Because the very idea of fighting on captured and modified equipment was unprecedented. Crews needed to learn not just how to shoot, but how to understand this machinery, feel its German soul, and know its weak points. 14 machines assembled in January 43 were assigned to the Moscow Artillery Center, and from there, to the newly formed 1435 Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment, 1435 SAP. By February 15th, 43, the regiment officially listed 16 SG-122s. And here came the first ominous sign. Of those 16, 5 were already in repair. Can you imagine? Nearly a third of the regiment was non-operational even before deployment. Why? Likely 2 reasons. First, operation in harsh winter conditions. The German Maybach could be finicky in deep frost. Second, and most importantly, the lack of spare parts. Where do you find a bearing or gear for a captured engine? They weren't in the Soviet supply system. Mechanics had to machine them on-site, file them to fit. It was titanic labor for repair crews. On February 20th, the 1435 SAP headed for the front. By then, only 12 combat-ready machines remained in its ranks, for had been transferred to the training center. And so they arrived at the front lines. The last known battle involving SG-122s occurred on March 14th, 43, an assault on the village of Yasnok. The attack force included 3 SU-122s, Soviet self-propelled guns based on trucks, and 4 of our SG-122s. Of the 8 machines, 6 never returned. 2 burned, 3 were knocked out. Only 2 made it back, and even they were damaged. That was the verdict, not on the machine, but on the entire concept. Why did the SG-122 disappear? Analysis and key reasons. The story of the SG-122 is one of brilliant tactical success and strategic failure. Why was it abandoned? Let's break it down point by point. Dependence on captured equipment. This is the main reason. You can't build a stable weapons system on what you seize from the enemy. The number of captured StuG IIIs was limited and unpredictable. Building 21 machines was one thing. Mass-producing hundreds was impossible in principle. Logistical nightmare. Imagine a regiment armed with SG-122s. It would need specialized German spare parts, mechanics trained in German engines and transmissions, its own separate set of tools. This placed an enormous burden on rear services. It was simpler and cheaper to field a regiment with standardized Soviet equipment, for which all parts and specialists were readily available. Tactical limitations. We've already mentioned the open superstructure and vulnerability. The SG-122 was a highly specialized weapon. It couldn't effectively engage tanks, though skilled crews might manage it, nor could it fire from concealed positions like a conventional howitzer. Its niche was narrow. The arrival of the SU-122. And here's the main competitor, the Soviet SU-122 on the T-34 chassis. It mounted the same powerful M30 howitzer, but it used a native, mass-produced chassis. It had a fully enclosed fighting compartment. It was simpler to produce, repair, and maintain. It offered better mobility and reliability. With the mass production of the SU-122 ramping up, The need for the MacGyvered SG-122 vanished on its own. Why struggle with captured vehicles when your own, just as good, was entering serial production? Memory dissolved in metal. Today, not a single authentic SG-122 survives anywhere in the world. Not in Russia, not in Germany, not in private collections. All 21 machines shared the fate of the millions who built and drove them. They burned in battle, were scrapped after testing, cannibalized for parts for other captured vehicles, or simply melted down for scrap. They didn't survive to stand on pedestals today. Their story is a ghost story, but that doesn't make it any less valuable. It's a story of how, in the darkest times, people didn't break, didn't give up, but instead thought, invented, and created from whatever they had. It's a monument not to metal, but to human ingenuity, perseverance, and the will to victory. So next time you see a German StuG III in a museum, remember, it might have had an unusual Soviet twin brother. A machine born of desperation, yet a symbol of how, even in hopeless situations, one must always seek one's own unique path. And so concludes our saga of the SG-122. I've tried to make it as vivid and detailed as possible. But what do you think? Were those 21 machines a waste of effort? Or was it the only right move in that situation? Maybe you know other examples of wartime improvisation? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. And of course, subscribe to the channel. Many more deep, intriguing analyses lie ahead. Your like and comment are the best thanks for this work.